All right, in this video, we're going to talk about how to make different kinds of graphs. So in this video, it kind of depends on, hopefully you've already looked at the frequency table video because you've got to make frequency tables before you make these graphs. So that's kind of some more of chapter 2. So I'm going to share my screen and share a PowerPoint with you and talk you through it. All right, so we're going to make different kinds of graphs. All right, we're going to do about 4 of them. All right, look what it says. The first kind of graph you're going to have to make is something called a histogram. Now, when you hear the word histogram, I want you to think bar graph. Now, that's not exactly correct because it's really a special kind of bar graph. But I don't want you drawing the wrong graph on a test. So when you hear histogram, bar graph should pop in your head. All right, here's your first step. And again, you should be taking notes, all right, on your own paper. The first thing that's true is you have to have a frequency table. So if you don't have a frequency table, then you've got to go make a frequency table, but you already know how to do that now, so it shouldn't be a problem. So once you've got a frequency table, you're going to have what's called a horizontal scale and a vertical scale. Like a horizontal goes, across, vertical goes up and down. I'm not going to say x-axis and y-axis because that implies something that's not true with numbers, okay? Because you can even have negative numbers right here. And see, if you were doing x-axis and y-axis, you couldn't have negative numbers in quadrant 1. All right, so that's why I just say horizontal scale and vertical scale. So you got to put the class boundaries on the horizontal scale. Now remember, you can go back to your other video and double check how to do that if you don't remember. All right, so remember what you do. You take the end of class 1, the beginning of class 2, and you subtract them. Remember, that would give us that 1. And then the next step said to divide that by 2. So remember, that's where we got 5/10 before. That 5/10 gets subtracted from these numbers and it gets added to these numbers. Now, if you've done it correctly, the upper boundary here will match the lower boundary down here. All right, so your upper boundary, when you remember, you add the 5/10 here and you subtract the 5/10 there. All these boundaries, you can go back and look in your notes. Remember, you're supposed to take notes. This is basically similar to what you did in the previous video. So if it bothers you, stop the video, go back and look at how to get boundaries on your frequency table. So my boundaries end up being 13 and 5/10, 20 and 5/10, 27 and 5/10, 34 and 5/10, and 40 and 5/10. So that's why these are the numbers that are over here. These are my boundaries. I don't put the same number twice. Like the upper boundary for your first class is 20.5 and the lower boundary for your second class is 20.5. They should match, but I don't put it down twice. Okay, so I write down all of my boundaries on my horizontal scale. Then it says you got to put the frequencies on the vertical scale. So I look and my biggest number is 5. So my frequencies have to go up to at least 5. It can go up more, but it can't go up less than your biggest frequency. And we talked about this in class, but you got to start with 0 on the vertical scale. You don't necessarily have to start with 0 on the horizontal scale, okay? Because you don't want somebody chopping a graph off and stretching it and distorting the graph, okay? So we've got to be really careful on this vertical scale. Now, if I need to see numbers, now you don't have to go up by ones. I mean, if this was like 10, 20, 10, and 50, I wouldn't want to go up by ones. I might go up by tens, like 10, 20, 30. So write how much you're going up by so I'll know. And then it says just draw each bar to a height that corresponds to its frequency. So my first class is 14 to 20. So this is my boundary. That's my lower boundary for my first class. And this 20 and 5/10 is my upper boundary for that first class. So it's got to go up to a frequency of 1. So I'm going to draw my bar up to a frequency of 1 for my first class. All right, let me kind of clear this a little bit. I didn't do a very good job. Let's try it again. So it's going to go up to 1. Okay, now the boundary here, remember this one starts with 20 and 5/10. And this one goes to 27 and 5/10 if you've done your boundaries correctly. So 20 and 5/10 to 27 and 5/10, 20 and 5/10 to 27 and 5/10. That's my class 2 boundaries. So it's got to go up to a height of 2. So where this one stops, the next one starts. That's what makes it a histogram. On a histogram, the bars touch. Okay. Then again, if I've done my boundaries correctly, this boundary down here is 27 5/10, and this boundary right here is 34 5/10. Okay, so my third one goes from 27 5/10 to 34 5/10. 27 5/10, 34 5/10. It also has a boundary of, it also has a height of 1. And then my last one's supposed to be a height of 5. All the way up and over and down. So that's what a frequency, that's what a histogram looks like. They are bars that touch. Okay. See, that's why you don't use the limits. If you put limits down here, this one would stop with 20 and that would start with 21 and the bars wouldn't touch, so it wouldn't be a histogram. Okay, so technically, so just make sure that you put class boundaries on this horizontal scale and frequencies go on this vertical scale. You got to go up to at least your highest frequency, but just make sure this vertical scale has to start with 0. So the horizontal one doesn't have to start with 0. Now, you can even put 13 5/10 right there. The book does put the smallest one right here, but I think it makes the graph harder to read. So you'll see me kind of skip over before I start. So that's how you make a histogram. Okay, so make sure that you've got these notes, that you've stopped, freeze the video, and make sure that you've got these steps in this example over here in your notes so you can do your homework. Okay, now the next kind of graph is something called a frequency polygon. Now, when you hear a frequency polygon, I need you to think line graph. So remember, histogram, you think bar graph, and frequency polygon, you think line graph, so you don't get them confused. Now, again, it's a special kind of line graph. Step 1's the same. You got to have a frequency table. All right. Step 2 is different. Remember, before you put the class boundaries on the horizontal scale. Okay. This time, I'm going to go back and I'm going to take these class boundaries off. And instead of putting class boundaries, I'm going to put midpoints here. Okay. So let me kind of go back. Now remember, how do I get the midpoints? Okay. To get the midpoints, I have to add. Okay. So if I add 14 and 20, all right. So I'll take my calculator and I add 14 and 20, and I better get 34. And when I divide that by 2, I get 17. So right here, I have a 17. All right. How do I get the next one? Well, I have to add 21 and 27. And when I do that, I get 48. And when I divide that by 2, I get 24. And then how do I get the next one? Okay, I've got to add 28 with my calculator to 34. So you should be doing this with me. Make sure you get 62. And when you divide that by 2, you get 31. Okay, and then I've got to do my next one. So I'm going to take 35 and I'm going to add 41. And when I do, I get 76. And when I divide that by 2, I get 38. Okay, and I don't even need this last one. All right, so I've got my midpoints, not my boundaries, but my midpoints. So boundaries go with histogram, midpoints go with frequency polygon. All right, now look what it says. You place a dot above each midpoint at a height that corresponds to its frequency. So this midpoint of this 17 is the midpoint of my first class. Okay, so I put a dot up here at a height of 1. All right, so I come up here and put a dot right there. 24 is my midpoint for class 2, and class 2 has a frequency of 2. So I get a dot of 2. My 31 is my midpoint for my third class. So it's got to be a height of 1. All right. And then my last one, my midpoint's 38, and the height goes all the way up to this 5. So you put dots above the midpoints at a height that corresponds to their frequency. Now remember, how are you going to get a line graph? What do you think you do? Yeah, you just connect the dots. I didn't do that very well. Okay, connect it to that dot. Okay, now I didn't name it, so don't get mad at me. All right, it's called a frequency polygon, and this is not a polygon. A polygon is a simple closed figure whose sides are line segments, and the problem is it's sitting closed. So to make it a polygon, you have to connect the endpoints for the horizontal scale. So you literally just take this and connect it down here to the horizontal scale, and you go to your endpoint here and connect it down here to the horizontal scale. And people freak out and go, where do I go? I just go about half the distance. I don't go straight down. I kind of go about half of a class width. So that's how you make a frequency polygon. So midpoints go here, frequencies go here. Again, notice the vertical scale, that frequency's got to start with 0. So right here, that frequency, that vertical scale's got to start with 0. And again, you don't have to go up by 1s. You can go up by 2s or 10s or whatever makes sense to you. Put a dot above each midpoint at a height that corresponds to the frequency. Connect the dots, and then make sure that you drop those endpoints down to that horizontal scale. So that's how you do a frequency polygon. Okay. So frequency polygon, line graph, histogram, bar graph. Let's talk about a circle graph. All right, now circle graphs can technically have words or numbers here. Okay, I did one with numbers just to kind of have the same table I had before, but it can be words. Okay, now the first step's the same. You got to have a frequency table, but that's why it says you can use categorical data. It could be words. So that's what's a little bit different. So instead of having, that's why I've got frequency table in air quotes. Frequency table has numbers here. So you basically have the same kind of thing, but you can't have words. Now what you're going to do is add these frequencies and get a total. So I added these numbers up, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So my total is 9. Now I've got to get a decimal. How do I get a decimal? I divide each individual frequency by the total. And then I round to the hundreds if I need to. So I take 1 and divide it by my total of 9. And I got 0.111111 all the way off my calculator. And I rounded to the hundreds. So it rounded to 0.11, 11 hundredths. Okay. Then I took my 2 and divided by my total 9. And I got 0.2222 all the way across. Okay. And I rounded it to my nearest hundred. So 0.22, 22 hundredths. Again, I put this frequency 1 divided by the total and rounded it. Now, when you take 5 and you divide by 9, you get 0.5555555. But remember, you're not chopping off, you're rounding off. All right, and let's go back up here and put round off. So you know that I'm rounding off. I'm not rounding up, I'm rounding off. So because that third number was a 5, that means the second one up to a 6. So it rounds to 0.56, not 0.55. If you round incorrectly, I'm going to count off. So round them to 2 numbers past the decimal. That's how you get the decimal numbers. Now you're going to do 2 different things with those decimal numbers. You've got to make percents out of them, and you've got to make angles out of them. Now, how do we make percents? To make percents, we take decimals and we multiply by 100. So when you take decimal 11, when you take 1100 and multiply by 11, you get 11. So you get 11%. 0.22 times 100 is 22. So I get 22%. 11 hundredths times 100 is 11. So I get 11%. And then decimal 56 times 100 is, decimal is 56. So I get 56%. So to go basically, all right. So to go from decimals to percents, you just multiply by 100 and then put your percent sign next to it. Well, now how do you get angles? To get angle measures, you go back to those same decimals, but instead of multiplying by 100, you multiply by 360. Now think about why 360. How many degrees in a whole circle? There are 360 degrees in a whole circle. So I'm going to take these numbers and I'm going to multiply now by 360. And I'm just going to round to the nearest whole number. So on my calculator, when I take 0.11 and I say times 360, I got 39.6. So if I rounded that to the whole number, that rounded to 40. So I got 39.6 when I said 0.11 times 360, but that number was bigger than 5, so that went up to 40. So I take my 0.22, I multiply that 0.22 times 360, and when I did, I got 79.2, which rounded to 79. All right. When I took that 0.1 and multiplied by 360, I got 39.6 again, so that rounded to 40. If I take 0.56 times 360, do that with a calculator. Looks like when I did, I got 201.6. But see, that number's bigger than 5, so that one goes up to 202. All right. So now what I've got to do is I've got to go back and I've got to draw the circle. So I just draw me a circle. And here's what I do. Now, you can go buy a protractor for very little money. All right. I'm just going to kind of eye it because I can't put a protractor here. All right, look what I'm going to do. You should know that this makes a right angle. So that's 90 degrees. So what happens when you have 90 degrees? Well, let me do it a little bit better than that. Okay, let me erase. All right. Now, let me go back. All right, if I have that, let's try it again. If I have that, that means that'd be 45 and that would be 45. All right. So let me go erase this one. I don't need that one. Now I don't need 45, remember. All right, remember I need, okay, I need, let's try it again. Eraser. So let's go back up here. I'm annotating. All right. Go back. I need a little bit smaller than that because I need 40, not 45. Okay, then I'm going to erase that one. So that's about 45 degrees. Okay. All right. Now, what I can do on paper that I can't do here is I can turn this around. So where this one stops, the next one starts. So this is where I begin. Now remember what I said, if I went like that, that would be another like 90 degrees. Okay. So I don't need 90 degrees, I need 79. So 79 is going to be a little smaller than that. I can't draw straight very well. Okay. Then I'm going to go erase this one. Okay. So I'm thinking that's 49 and that's about 79. That's about 40 and about 79. Now I've got to make another 40-degree angle. All right. So again, you know, I'm thinking, okay, if I went right there, that would be 90 degrees. And if I halved it, that would be 45. And I need a little less than that. Okay. So now I'm going to go erase the ones I don't need. But if you got a protractor, you can just do that with your protractor. So there's my 40 degrees. Okay. There's my center. Back. All right, here's my center. So I think this one's about 40. You know, I think this one is about 79 and that one's about 40. Then that one should be about 202. And that looks right because remember, straight across would be 180. Okay, and it's more than 180. Okay, erase that one. I'm going to erase that one. So now I can fix that one. It didn't do very good. Okay, let me go back. Okay, go back and draw it back in. It's about right there. And see, sure enough, these look to be about the same size. Now, what I want you to do is I want you to write your classes in there. So that's the 14 to 20 class. This is the 21 to 27 class. This is the 28 to a 34 class. And then this one's my 35 to my 41 class. I will get your percentages and your angle measures from your scratch work. Okay. So protractor makes it easier to draw exact measurements. That's just kind of a rough sketch. See, this one's a little more than 180. That's about half of a 90, about half of 49. This one's bigger than these, not as big as those. So it looks reasonable. Okay. So stop that and make sure that you can do that. You can draw me a circle graph. Okay. Now, we're going to go to the last kind, which is called a stem and leaf plot. All right. Now this one's fine. I don't find them super helpful. Okay. But what you have to do is not really a whole bunch of steps. You're on a frequency table. They just give you a bunch of data and you make two columns out of it. And one side's called the stem and one side's called the leaves. But really, unless you give them a key, it's only good for the one making the stem plot. That's why I don't think they're real helpful. But somehow you got to take your data and you got to divide it into two pieces. Well, now, because this data is mostly 2-digit, I just let the tens number be the stem and I let the ones number be the leaf. Okay. So this was my stem and this was my leaf, my leaves. Okay. Now, but a lot of times there won't even be a heading for anybody to know that. Now, what was I going to do with something like 2? Well, I don't have 2 numbers. So I thought of 2 like 0, 2. That's another way of writing 2. So I put down from small to big all of my tens digits. If there was some missing, I had to include them. Okay. So even though I didn't have any 30s, I can't just jump from the 2 to the 4. All right. So then when I did 25, I did the 2 and I put the 5. So at first I had like this, 2, and then I had a 5. All right. So like, then you do 78. All right. So let me do this. All right. So I do like 0, 1, 2. My biggest one's in the what, 780. So I had to go all the way to 8. All right, so I went up here and did 25, so 2 and a 5. And they don't put commas between them, so that's weird. 78. So I went down to the 70s and put an 8. Then I did 64. So next to the 6, I put a 4. I did 19, so 1, 9. I got 16, so I'm still on the 1 row, but now I got a 6. All right, I got a 42, so I got a 4 and a 2. And now I got to go do a 71. So I go down to my 70s and I have a 71. Now 8 would have to be like 0, 8. 74 would be like 74. 81 would be like 81. 26 would be like a 2 and a 6. All right. 2 would be like 0, 2. All right. So I do all that, but it wants them to put the numbers in numerical order. So I had to erase and fix it. I need the 2 before the 8. Or I need, you know, the 5 before the 6, but then I got to put a 3. So if you put your data in order first, you don't end up making a table and then fixing it. So I would advise you to put the data in order. Then when you make the table, like I was doing, it'll automatically be in order from small to big. Now, what's weird about it though, what if your data was like 115 and then 125 and then 132? And then 114, and then 135. Well, now it's going to be a little stickier. You got 3 digits. How are you going to break it into 2 pieces? Well, see, it wouldn't make any sense to let the hundreds number be the stem because all of them start with a 1. So you'd have just one long row of numbers. So instead, I might let my stem be the first 2 numbers. So 1, 1. 1, 2, 1, 3. So I'd have like 115, 125, 132, 114, 130. But see, I don't know. This could have been 1,154. So it's not really very good unless you kind of do that. Okay. So just be cognizant that stem and leaf plots aren't really exact, but you can see the distribution pretty well. So maybe I was working in the ER and these were people that had COVID over the weekend, and I just want to kind of see the distribution. So it looks like that this strain of COVID might be hitting older people and younger people, not too much middle-aged people. So it's just a way to get a quick look at the data. All right. So the ones, remember, that you're responsible for is a histogram, think bar graph. Okay. And go back and remember that you have your boundaries here. Frequency polygon, think line graph. Remember, you have your midpoints here. Circle graph and stem and leaf plot. So that's the ones that you're responsible for so far. Okay. So try that homework. And again, if you have any trouble, make sure that